Before the sound, there was a story. Before the rhythm, there was a memory. From Africa to the diaspora, our music carries us. You are listening to the Akojokwa Music Foundation podcast, where Pan-African art music professionals gather to share their stories.
Akojokwa. Hi there. My name is Joshua Kerobo, a seventh-year PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at the University of Michigan. Today, for Akojokbo Podcast, I'll be talking about a brief history of African art music and Pan-Africanism. So, here's the introduction: African art music and Pan-Africanism. African art music is art music created by anyone of African descent, informed by African cultural traditions and European art music training. It is a product of the colonial encounter and post-colonial interactions that affect the lives of African musicians and music scholars. While situated within Western or Western-influenced music academies, African musicians made documented music decisions that were influenced by their understandings of the African music cultures they brought with them to the West. They grew global knowledge in the study of African music. Thus, African art music is an art music that uses stylistic and instrumental materials of African music that can be created or performed by anyone. Pan-Africanism is an ideological term summarizing the basis for African unity after considering the colonial encounter and post-colonial interactions with former colonial powers and neocolonialists. It calls for the political, economic, and cultural unification of Africans in the Afro-diaspora. It had three purposes. One, to gain socio-political independence from former colonialists and neocolonialists. Two, to develop Afro and Afro-diasporic communities. And three, to counter global discrimination by positively centering Afro and Afro-diasporic cultures. In other ways, it was known as negritude in early 20th century Francophone West Africa. I've defined Pan-Africanism because it is at the ideological core of African art music. African art music wouldn't exist without Pan-Africanism. The political, economic, and cultural assertions of Pan-African thought among Afro and Afro-diasporic communities in the late 19th through the 20th century gave way to the development of African art music. As Pan-Africanists pushed for political change within the West, Afro and Afro-diasporic peoples gained new opportunities to speak and act for themselves. African music practitioners, such as Dr. Kwabena Nkecha and Dr. Akinyuba, directly benefited from the expansion of research and performance opportunities in the West and in other Afro and Afro-diasporic communities as a result of Pan-Africanism. We should remember that these advancements can be traced to key events and figures in the African independence movement inspired by Pan-Africanism, such as the Pan-African Congresses and Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana. So here's Pan-Africanism in action: the Pan-African Congresses and Kwame Nkrumah. The Pan-African Congresses are a series of 8 meetings where leaders of African descent meet to discuss issues of importance to Black and African liberation worldwide. Their goals are to make coordinated political, cultural, and economic decisions that would provoke Black and African sovereignty in Africa and its diasporas. The first Congress was in London in 1919, and the most recent took place in Johannesburg, South Africa, in 2014. The Congresses follow the first Pan-African Conference in 1900, organized by Trinidadian lawyer, politician, and activist Henry Sylvester Williams in London. Sylvester Williams was one of the first Black men to hold public office in England and was the first Black man to practice law in the Cape Colony, now South Africa. The fifth Pan-African Congress was held on October 15th through the 17th in Manchester in 1945, and it is the most relevant event connecting Pan-Africanism and African art music. The Congress is noted commemoratively at Chorlton Town Hall, All Saints, Manchester, as a historic event because decisions taken at the conference led to liberation of African countries. Leaders of African descent from Africa, the Americas, Europe, and Asia met in the wake of World War II, eager to add Black and African liberation as an imperative of the post-war era. Kwame Nkrumah is listed with 5 other towering figures of Pan-Africanism as an active participant in the event. Nkrumah was initially Prime Minister of the Gold Coast, now known as Ghana, in the mid to late 1950s. Then he served as Ghana's first president after it gained independence on March 6, 1957. His discussions with other Pan-African leaders of issues such as, quote, the color problem in England, end quote, imperialism in North and West Africa, end quote, oppression in South Africa, end quote, the problem in the Caribbean, end quote, and, quote, women in the West Indies, end quote, directly contributed to Black liberation and African independence. They helped guide the political, economic, and cultural imperatives of a Pan-Africanism that benefited African art music creators on the African continent and in the West. So here are the musical legacies of Pan-Africanism. Kwabena Nkecha, Akin Yuba, and the African art music that they left behind. The seminal African music scholar, Dr. Kwabena Nkecha of Ghana, had a close relationship with Pan-Africanist Kwame Nkrumah. Dr. Kwabena Nkecha was Africa's foremost music scholar before his death in 2019. He was an accomplished ethnomusicologist, linguist, musician, poet, and Pan-Africanist, creating over 200 academic publications and 40 instrumental and choral works. Nkrumah's trust for Nkecha's work was so strong that with only a bachelor's degree, he invited Nkecha to be a foundation fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1959 as one of 20 foremost Ghanaian scholars at the time. Nkrumah also made Nkecha the first African director of the Institute of African Studies in 1965, a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary institute with the mandate to conduct research into all aspects of the arts and social sciences in Africa. Nkecha was an African ethnomusicologist and linguist, rooted in both his upbringing in Ghana's Akan culture and academic study in the West. Both influenced his African art music compositions and his academic publications. So while Nkecha did study at the University of London, Columbia University, the Juilliard School, and many other institutions, it was in Ghana where he was formed as an Akan man. Indeed, it was at Akwapem, Akwaprong, at the Presbyterian Training College that Nketia studied in his formative years from 1937 to 1941, and where he was later appointed to teach music and the Tree language. These influences guided Nketia's academic work. So his funeral dirges for the Akan people, or African music in Ghana, his linguistic aspect of style in African languages, his work on Norton's The Music of Africa, and of course of ethnomusicology and African music, modes of inquiry and interpretation, represent only a few examples of his prolific academic and musical production. They also guided his African art music compositions, such as his instrumental works Volta Fantasy, Owora, and Dagarty Work Song, as well as such other choral and vocal works like Mona Nashe, Adanse Kron Kron, Obarima, Nifahene, and Yadan Heneba. So these are only a couple of examples of some of the work that Kwabena Nkecha left behind for us to listen to and to recognize the connections with. Akin Yuba is also an example of somebody benefiting from Pan-Africanism. He earned his PhD in ethnomusicology in 1974 under Kwabena Nkecha at the University of Ghana, Legon, for his dissertation, Dundun Music of the Yoruba, so about the talking drum. Dr. Akin Yuba was another seminal African music scholar. He was a composer, musicologist, and pianist. As Akin Yuba started taking piano lessons in 1943 at the age of 8 with his father in Lagos, he was steeped in Nigeria's Yoruba culture, Thus, his upbringing models those of other African art music composers. Akinyuba went to study at Trinity College of Music in London, University of California, Los Angeles, and at the University of Ghana, Legon. But his studies led him to develop the term African art music as a form of music that is universal to all Africa, and that in order to be truly African, must use the stylistic and instrumental materials of African music, or at least have a preponderance of them. This analysis was based on Yuba's reflections on his scholarly development abroad, as well as on his time as head of music at the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. He also developed the terms African pianism, intercultural music, and creative ethnomusicology during his successful academic and musical career. Although much of Yuba's contributions to African art music and the Music Academy have yet to be explored, his theories influenced his own academic works, notably essays on music in Africa and J.H. Kwabena Nkecha, Bridging Musicology and Composition, a study in creative musicology. His theories also heavily influenced his musical works, as exemplified by 6 Yoruba songs, 2 Yoruba folk songs, Wanderer, Igi Nlaso, Scenes from Traditional Life, Shaka, an opera and 2 chants. He did the Festac 1977 album, and many other works. So here's the conclusion. Both Kwabena Nkecha and Akinyuba benefited from a Pan-Africanism that established them and other African scholars as equal global citizens and not lesser colonial subjects, rendering their perspectives as valid and paving the way for their music and research. Without Pan-Africanism, neither Nkecha nor Yuba would have been free to study and theorize the perspectives that have continued to contribute to the concept of an African art music. For example, Nketiah's theorization of the 6/8 time signature, as opposed to the 2/4 time signature with triplets, is a better visual indicator of the rhythmic pulse that undergirds many traditional African musics, and that is an important contribution to African music transcription. This is equally true for Yuba's development of African art music, or that of African pianism, which is characterized by thematic repetition, 1, 2, direct borrowings of thematic material, whether it be rhythmic or tonal, from African traditional sources, and 3, the use of rhythmic and or tonal motifs, which, although not borrowed from specific traditional sources, are based on traditional idioms and percussive treatment of the piano. Neither of these intellectual developments would have been respected without the advancements of Pan-Africanism that gave Afro and Afro-diasporic peoples a global voice. Ultimately, we should remember that Pan-Africanism helped African music scholars to develop as scholars and musicians, to be recognized for their scholarly and music contributions, and to be given opportunities for their music studies, or for their future studies, rather. The advancements of African art music are directly connected to key events and figures in the African independence movement that were inspired by Pan-Africanism. The same spirit of Pan-Africanism continues to support the study of African music among African music scholars today. Thank you.
As we close today's conversation, we're reminded that Pan-African art music is more than a sound. It is a memory, movement, and meaning. At Akojokwa Music Foundation, we exist to listen, to document, and to support the artists and cultural workers shaping this living tradition. To learn more about our work, our programs, and how you can engage with this growing community, please visit akojokwa.org. Thank you again for listening, and until next time.
Akojokwa.